Hello, welcome to episode 6 of Le Chemin du Roi. I'm Lisa Elvin Stoltari, and I am a genealogist and a passionate traveler. We have been exploring Le Chemin du Roi now. This is our 6th episode of this series. As I always start, I talk about genealogy and the importance of location, just like in real estate. And as I've been doing genealogy, it has been obvious to me that unless you know the lay of the land, you are like a traveler without a map, or in today's jargon, no GPS. And once you understand the places, the route, how they got around, how they interacted with people, it gives you a much better perspective on their lives, but it also helps you find them. So we can figure it out, so to speak. So with that being said, that is the reason why I am doing, this particular series, Le Chemin du Roi. We'll talk at length about it. But this is actually my travel itinerary because I plan on doing this. As I've been looking and researching these particular towns, it occurred to me, oh my gosh, I need to travel here. I can't travel yet, but once I do, here's my list. I would love if any of you have any suggestions or thoughts, please send them to me. I have a website called Have Roots Will Travel. You can email me there at lisa@haverootswilltravel.com. Or you can also post them on the comments below. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and would love to hear any and all thoughts and feedback. That really would be wonderful. And also, don't forget to subscribe and like this video if that's indeed your preference. And also that little bell, the notifications alert, that will keep you up to date as to all my uploads. So with that being said, let's get started, shall we? The very first travel that we are doing is a famous road called Le Chemin du Roi, or the King's Road or Highway. The idea for doing this particular highway came to me as I've been working on a concurrent series, Les Filles du Roi, which is still going on. Many of the women who settled New France moved into villages along this very same highway. Let's begin by exploring a little bit of Chemin du Roi. Now, for those of you who have been with me throughout the journey, you've heard this before, but let's just review a little bit. Let's talk about the road itself as it exists today. It is part of the Quebec highway system and is now known as Route 138. It's a very long road that starts off on a very remote town called Blanc-Sablon. In the left hand of your screen, you will see a big arrow pointing to Blanc-Sablon. You go all the way down to the bottom left, and it will say, there's another big arrow. There's no town listed there. Couldn't find a map with Elgin on it, but Elgin, Quebec, sits on the border of New York and Quebec. And that is where Route 138 officially ends. It's a whopping 880 miles or 1,420 kilometers. Now, this Route 138 passes through 5 regions. There are only 17 regions in Quebec, so 5 of them is a great big chunk of them. It passes through Montérégie, Lanaudière, Mauricie, Capitale-Nationale, and Côte-Nord regions of Quebec. So that tells you how long and how it really is the depth and width of the province of Quebec. Part of the highway that we are going to be exploring is known as the Chemin du Roi, or the King's Highway, which is actually one of the oldest highways in Canada. This is the portion we'll be traveling along as we get to explore the history of Quebec together. Now, how did it all start? Well, in 1706, the Conseil Supérieur, the Grand Council of New France, decreed that a road be built to connect the houses along the north shore of the St. Lawrence River between Quebec City and Montreal. Work finally began 25 years later in true government fashion under the supervision of Le Renvoyer, the senior road surveyor, Eustache Lanounier de Boisclair, and was completed in 1737. Remarkable. 6 years. I've known construction projects in my own life that were longer than that. Upon completion, the Chemin was 7.4 meters or 24 feet wide and over 280 kilometers, 170 miles long. And it crossed, get this, 37 seigneuries. We will explore seigneuries, but they were actually kind of the feudal system that the Quebec had at the time. But 37 of them, the odds are if you have family or ancestors in Quebec, one of your ancestors lived along these in one of these seigneuries. The Chemin du Roi was actually the longest road in existence at the time, north of Mexico. Now, in 1910, the portion of the Chemin du Roi on Montreal Island was renamed Gouin Boulevard. They took down the signs. It no longer is part of the King's Highway. And so, but essentially, it still is, you know, in principle. It was the Chemin du Roi, the King's Road, is the first roadway built between Quebec City and Montreal that could accommodate wheeled vehicles, and by that we mean carriages, of course, along its entire length. And so I really think when I've been studying this and really examining the history of these small towns, I really think that part of the connection and the strength of Quebec is one of the things, I think, is the Chemin du Roi that really connected so many parts of Quebec in a way that hadn't been done before. And this is, we're talking 1737 when the road was finalized. That is 22 years before the fall of Quebec, the conquest. And I think the Chemin du Roi played an important role throughout the 1700s and 1800s and into 1900s before the modern system of roads was built, to really connect the small towns and the people and kind of reinforce their culture and their solidarity, if you will. And so you really have to look at roads in a different way, I think, sometimes, and really examine what do they do beyond, you know, the obvious. And I think that Route 130 or the Route 138 or Chemin du Roi is a lot like Route 66 in the United States in terms of bringing the people together and really examining how they can, the highways and byways, how they get around is very principal. And in the 1950s, when they did the modern highway system in the United States, part of that was also a connecting route, a way to make towns and states that hadn't been otherwise examined kind of flourish, if you will. And we saw the same thing in Canada as well with the Trans-Canada Highway and all of that. So roads are really critical to understanding genealogy in many respects. Now, I've entitled this, Are We There Yet? Because I want to make sure we use the reality principle, which is that this long blue line from Quebec City to Repentigny, which is where it will end, is actually, or so Google tells me, 2 hours and 20 minutes. It really is not a long road to travel on in modern day roads. It will take us it is taking us 11 episodes, but we are examining and we are stopping along the way. If you want to just, you know, kind of take a scenic view, this is a wonderful 2-hour journey. And along the way, you will see those signs, Chemin du Roi and Le Vieux Chemin, and different ones as well, I'm sure, in different towns. You will always know that you have to see those signs in order to know that you're on that historic route. And of course, have your picture taken, which I fully intend to do as well. So with that being said, let's get started. Where are we going today? We are exploring Trois Rivieres. In 2021, the city's population was 140,000 people, which makes it the second largest city that we are exploring. Lots to see. We're only going to be exploring Trois Rivieres today. The city's name, which is French for Three Rivers, is named actually for the fact that the St. Maurice River has 3 mouths at the St. Lawrence River. It's divided by 2 islands in that river. Historically, in English, the city was known as Three Rivers. When I was growing up in Drummondville, we called it Three Rivers because we were Anglophone, we were English. But as time passed, more and more people, the French always called it Trois Rivières, of course, but more and more now it is just said that way, Trois Rivières. And so, because there was actually Three Rivers in, I believe, Michigan, if you Google it. So it can be, Trois Rivières is unique unto itself. But over time, especially toward the end of the 20th century, Trois Rivières and that moniker, that name, began to be used, kind of exclusively. Now let's explore a little tiny bit of this city's history. We could go on and on. The city was the second to be founded in New France after Quebec City, but before Montreal, which Trois-Rivières people will remind you of. Given its strategic location, it plays an important role in the colony and in the fur trade with the First Nations people. The settlement became the seat of a regional government in 1665. The Ursuline nuns first arrived at the settlement in 1697 when they founded the first school and helped local missionaries to Christianize the local Aboriginals and developing Métis. French sovereignty in Trois-Rivières continued until 1760 when the city was captured as part of the British conquest of Canada during the 7 Years' War. 16 years later, on June 8, 1776, it was the theater of the Battle of, here we're going to call it the Battle of Three Rivers, because that's what it's known as, part of the ill-fated invasion of the province of Quebec by the Americans. They did not succeed, obviously, because Canada remained a separate country. And in 1792, it was designated as the seat of a judicial district. In 1852, the Roman Catholic Church made this the seat of the Diocese of Three Rivers. In 1816, the Captain A.G. Douglas, a former adjunct at the British military colony at Great Marlow, recommended a military college for Catholic and Protestant boys be established at Trois-Rivières. And, the Renaissance, I want to point out, though, that in 1908, fire destroys most of Trois-Rivières and its historic buildings. Can you imagine? Devastation. I mean, this place had been such a long time, and only a few survived. So, in a sense, it was kind of probably like that Great Fire in Chicago. And so they rebuilt, and there are, of course, and you'll see them as we go through this, some remaining buildings, but those are extremely precious, as you can imagine. In the 1960s, after kind of a downturn in manufacturing, because Montreal and Quebec City kind of took the helm of how big Trois-Rivières was, it became a very cultural and educational force. And although it's not now, it's part of the medium-sized cities that includes Sherbrooke, and it includes Gatineau and Saguenay. It is still part of a very important base of economy for Quebec. However, from a historical point, it's hard to beat it. Other than Quebec City, you've got Trois-Rivières. You must go there in order to understand how Quebec grew. It really is that critical to your understanding. If you're going to pick a place other than Quebec City to understand the history, Trois-Rivières is the spot. Well, let's explore, Trois-Rivières as it became a city on July 4th, 1634, actually. And among those early pioneers, well, we're going to start with La Violette, who was the actual founder, and he would go on to become the acting governor of Trois-Rivières. But people who arrived there in Trois-Rivières would later on play huge roles in the rest of Canada, or Quebec, I should say. So we have Pierre Boucher, who would become the governor of New France. And then we have as well Jacques Hertel, who was an important figure in the land and the development. Then we have Jacques Leneuf de la Poterie and his wife, Marguerite Legardeur, who show up. And Michel Leneuf, his brother, also comes and would marry into, I believe, would marry a fille du roi. But I digress. So Jacques Leneuf becomes governor of Trois-Rivières, and he's acting governor of New France. And Michel Leneuf would become a royal judge. Now, what was important is that Jacques brought along his wife. And his wife's brothers, you see how everything is related, they came along, and Pierre Legardeur de Repentigny, remember that name? And Charles Legardeur de Tilly, who also became a very important person because he became the future governor. Charles Legardeur. Pierre Legardeur de Repentigny obviously became one of the landowners that we will study later on as we move forward down the Chemin du Roi. And so you'll see these names throughout Quebec. You will absolutely begin to see the importance of those very, very early colonists at Trois-Rivières. And these were very brave and incredibly accomplished men. So now we come to the enormous Cathédrale de l'Assomption de Trois-Rivières, which, as you can see from the picture, is phenomenal. I mean, it really is the mother church for all the regions of all of the Three Rivers and the, all of the churches in Batiscan and all of that in the Mauricie. This is the mother church. Now, what's interesting about this, cathedral is that, or the religious history of Trois-Rivières, phenomenal, because the first mass was celebrated on the local soil, so that means like right around here, on July 26th, get this, 1615, held by the Récollet, which is like the Jesuit priest, Denis Jamais. So 5 years before the Mayflower, they're celebrating mass. I just let that soak in. The parish that would eventually become Trois-Rivières was started on October 30th, 1678. So before that, the people of Trois-Rivières generally went to either had their own, ceremonies in a small chapel, or they went to Quebec City to get married and that sort of thing. So you will see a lot of your ancestors getting married in Quebec City, but doing actually settling down in Trois-Rivières. And on June 8th, 1852, Trois-Rivières is canonically erected by Pope Pius IX, and Bishop Thomas Cook becomes the first bishop. The new cathedral that we see now was blessed on September 29, 1858, which is still, 150 odd years ago, which is remarkable. So all of your church documents that you're going to be looking for your ancestors in Trois-Rivières will generally be in the parish, because it was started in 1678. So all of the churches that would have happened along there would have ultimately condensed all of the records that you will need. So it's la Cathédrale de l'Assomption de Trois-Rivières is where the main focus of your attention will be for most of your ancestry research. As you can expect, in a town this old, there are cemeteries and cemeteries, and I picked a few out that are the biggest. Cimetière Saint-Michel, Cimetière Saint-Louis, both were newer, if you will, but they're also a couple of the most prominent. One of the oldest is the Cimetière des Ursulines de Trois-Rivières. If you recall, they came to Trois-Rivières in 1697, and these date from the early 1700s as well. So you will have to do the research. It's really in the cemeteries that you're going to find the challenge to find out where your ancestor would have been buried. I would definitely urge you to look up resources like Billion Graves and Find a Grave, interment.net. All of those could help you figure out where you need to be looking. So now we come to a tale of three churches, the English side of Trois Rivieres. Now we start with the St. James's Church, which is a remarkable church. It existed as a monastery before the British conquest of New France in 1760 here in Trois Rivieres. It eventually became St. James's Church, but one important note to know is that this is the actual church where the people of Trois Rivieres surrendered and signed the paper, surrendering their right and declaring their fidelity, if you will, to the British Crown. So it is a certainly important part in terms of English history and all that happened here, but it is for the French kind of a sore spot, I would think. It's not a happy place. It was not a happy place for them. For the Anglicans, who eventually took over, this became very, very important and was a stronghold for them throughout the many centuries. It still exists today. It serves a very, very small population of Anglican English-speaking people of Trois Rivieres. Now, the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, that no longer exists, but the buildings remain. And the Methodist Church is repurposed, and it is actually a restaurant, a little bistro, which I think is amazing. And I always like the idea of, buildings finding new homes. It is kind of a really interesting thing to go in there and eat a meal inside the church. Now, the cemeteries, let's have a look at those. Now, what happened in the Trois Rivieres with the Anglophone population, the English population, the renovation of the courthouse in Trois Rivieres in the 1920s required that no further burials were permitted in the Anglican cemetery, and that all the tombs of the Union Cemetery be moved to some new location. Faced with this decision, the three Anglophone congregations formed, which is the Methodist, the Presbyterian, and the Anglicans, formed the Forest Hill, which you'll see on the bottom, the Forest Hill Cemetery Company, which bought the lots where the new cemetery now stands. The trustees of this company were drawn from the managers of the many Anglophone companies which were operating here in those days. So, you'd have the paper manufacturing, all of that. The running costs of the cemetery were covered to a great extent by those same companies. So if your family worked in one of those companies, it's highly possible that they had an instrumental part in getting this done, and really a beautiful cemetery, as you can see. The Church of England, they could not bury anymore, and this is how they got around it. Well, let's start our touring of Trois Rivieres. We cannot go anywhere in Trois Rivieres without seeing the name Bushi. We'll start with the Manuel De Bushi, which is a remarkable piece of history that features the home of Joseph Claude Bushi, who is the grandson of Pierre Bushi. This was the home of Joseph Claude and his wife Marie-Joseph, and it really gives you a very good period of the 17th century kind of look, and you can tour it. I've included the website so you can see about the hours and that sort of thing. Obviously, the Musée Pierre Boucher will tell you everything you ever wanted to know and more about this fabulous man who created and helped found not only Boucherville, later on, Boucherville, which is closer to Montreal, but was instrumental in Three Rivers. And then we also have the Place Pierre Boucher Fountain, which is a lovely, lovely spot, particularly in the summer. Not so sure about the winter, but I could be wrong. So I've included all of the information for you to check those places out. Now, le Musée des Orphelins de Trois-Rivières. Remember I told you they came in 1697? This is one of the buildings that was spared in that 1908 fire, so very important. And then we have Le Moulin Signoret de Pointe-du-Lac, which is also like a mill. That's what it is. The Signors always had to have a mill, and this is the Signors mill at Pointe-du-Lac. And now they run it as a living history that you can visit, which will definitely be on my list. More museums. This is a big town. We have Le Musée Pop, which is fascinating because it really is about cultural. So especially if you're traveling with children or young adults, this will be the museum that they will really like because it's not just about old things. It's all about it's not pop rock or anything like that. It really is about the populaire, and so which means current affairs, and also a little bit of history, of course, but really talks more about the cultural aspect of Quebec and the history. Le Musée Militaire de Trois-Rivières, very important for those of you wanting to study the military history, and anybody who has, that's their thing, that it's a must to see. Le Musée Borellas, when I found this, I was like, wow, this museum is a museum focused on paper manufacturing. That's it. Gotta go. I just got to go. Because paper manufacturing in Trois-Rivières and elsewhere in Quebec, huge, huge. So the understanding of how this industry shaped and formed Quebec is, I think, pretty important to understand. So with all this, touring around, I'm going to get hungry. The first restaurant on your left, Restaurant Le Grec, it was recommended to me by locals as because it's like a place you got to go. It has been serving Greek-themed food since 1959. And what makes this place so special, I am told, is that the serving staff are all dressed up in traditional Greek fashion. It's quite the show. Definitely on my list. The next place is called the Manuel De Bushi, which has been around since 1978 as a restaurant. But that's not why I made my list. It's found on Hart Street in the middle of historic Trois-Rivières and was the former home of Ezekiel Hart, who the street was named after, and who was a prominent businessman, politician, and entrepreneur. His Jewish faith created problems for him to serve in Parliament. And for those of you who want to know more about him, I would urge you to look him up. It is due in no small part to his efforts and his life that in 1832, the Canadian Parliament passed a bill, the 1832 Emancipation Act, that ultimately guaranteed full rights to people practicing the Jewish faith. There is something so special about being able to eat a simple spaghetti dinner in the house of a man who dared to achieve so much. I just really want to be surrounded by that kind of history. Now, Le Castel made the list because it dates from 1954, which, according to Rivieres, isn't that old. But I've chosen it not only for its longevity, but the creativity of its menu, the mail order business they have, as well as catering and event planning. I love when I see a business of long standing keep reinventing itself. Now, Le Boc Pub Gastronomique, it made the list because when I was researching the restaurants, the date of this restaurant's building caught my eye. 1757, 2 years before the conquest of Quebec, and 3 before the conquest of Quebec and Three Rivers. So this house has stood and was a witness to all of this building. It straddled New France and became Lower France and then Quebec. If I get to sit in this place, it will be like I'm sitting in I'm crossing the centuries. I'm time traveling. Apparently, they serve wonderful beer and wine, Quebec made, and truly unique food. Gotta go. Le Bistrot de l'Ancestre, which essentially the ancestors' bistro. It's a fine dining restaurant in a 19th century home. This one speaks to me of romance and celebration. The menu encompasses the traditional beef and fish and shellfish and pasta with, of course, a unique Quebecois twist. It looks very promising. Can't wait to try it. I've entitled this Quintessentially Quebec. Because I really want you to get to know some of the, local chains, national chains that exist so that you will get a sense of the lay of the land. Because we can't always eat in fancy places, and there's plenty of just normal, good, down-home folk, as they say, places where you can eat. Let's start with the left hand. We have Chemin, which is a very, very classic Quebecois. It has many, many branches, and I believe it's started to extend into other parts. I think they're into Ontario now. It's one of my favorites. Very fresh. Very unique twist on breakfast, and every time I go to Quebec, I have to go to Chicago. It's just, that's a thing. And they, I think, have dinner, breakfast, not dinner. They have breakfast and lunch, I think. Lunch, I think they close around 2 o'clock. Breakfast is a very big thing in Quebec. You'll figure it out. Now, St. Hubert barbecue. I grew up on St. Hubert barbecue. So for me, chicken is St. Hubert. Now, I'm told that there's Benny and Company, and we'll be exploring that. But St. Hubert for me is the classic. Sauce I grew up with, how they cook the chicken, the spice, all of that good stuff. Tim Hortons, gotta have your Tims, which is coffee and a donut. Stratos Pizzeria actually got its start in Trois Rivieres in 1959 by a Greek immigrant who just said, you know what, I'm going to start this thing off. I think there's more than 20 branches of Stratos throughout Quebec. We're going to see a few of them along the way. Now, Ben and Florentine is another breakfast place. I do not know this, but it looks amazing. Got to try it as well. And it also is breakfast and lunch only. And so this will be something that you will continuously see in your travels in Quebec. And with that, we end episode 6 of Trois Rivieres. It's been an amazing trip. Trois Rivieres really is the jewel in the crown of Quebec, in my opinion. So with that, I will bid you adieu. We will see you on episode 7. I wonder where we're going to go. Episode 7. Until then, au revoir.